I am Stephanie Rieger. I don't know if a lot of people have seen my face before, but I'm usually here in the back office helping these things go down. We have Mark Shepard here today. He's going to go over another week of restoration agriculture, and I'm going to let him get to it. I'm going to give it over to Mark. Take it away.
Alrighty. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. Once again, we are going through our curriculum on forest ecology, and we've made it to succession, which is the system development through time, how an ecosystem changes. And I just tried to advance the slide, and it didn't. There we go. And it was just, a little over a week ago, Bill Mollison passed away. I first saw this quote, I hadn't seen it before, where he says that there's only one and only one solution. We have almost no time to try it. We must turn all of our resources to repairing the natural world and train all our young people to help. They want to. We need to give them this last chance to create forests, soils, clean waters, clean, secure communities, stable regions, and know how to do it from hands-on experience. That's what I'm all about, have been all about for the past 20, 30 years. And that's what the Economics Action Team is all about, is creating systems that are ecologically sound and economically profitable. This is not the Economics blogging team. This is not the Economics spectator team. This is the Economics Action Team, ecological economics. We're doing things, making real change in the world, even if it's only by the power of one. Get up and do something. And restoration agriculture, of course, we are redesigning agriculture, the production of human foodstuffs, especially our staple foods, our carbohydrates, proteins, and oils, redesigning agriculture in nature's image. We're mimicking natural systems to produce our foods and fuels and medicines and fibers. Advance the slide, there we go. And tonight we're going to be talking about ecological succession. There's a whole bunch of different words that describe this. It's called ecological succession, natural succession, plant succession, forest succession. We could just say succession. But ecological succession is that over time, all terrestrial and aquatic plant and animal communities change. They change through time. If we look here on the left side of the screen, we start with plants looking like this, and then other ones develop and grow, and develop and grow. And on this particular site here, we end up with a long-term forest of oak hickory forest. It's not going to be that way on every site. Every site is different. And ecological succession is the change in species composition over time, the types of different species that you'll find on a particular piece of land somewhere. It's the replacement of one kind of suite or series of life or community of life by a different community. And it takes time for that to happen. Sometimes it's fast, sometimes it's slow. That includes changes in the soil. If you look at agricultural soil, the life in agricultural soil, like annual crops, it's different than the life in perennial crops. It's different than the life in the soil of a prairie. It's different than the life in the soil of a savanna, different than the life in the soil from a forest. And all the different stages of site development, including in the forest. Early successional forest is going to have different soil life than later successional forest. The plant life changes, obviously, and the animal life that goes with it. Succession involves changes of biomass accumulation. There may be actually more carbon accumulated on a site. Actually might be more carbon lost on a site. So changes in nutrient cycling. Certain phases of ecosystem development cycle more nutrients than others. Long term, let's take a redwood forest, for example. Their nutrient cycling is rather slow. They've accumulated as many of the nutrients that they possibly could. It's all in their bodies, and there's not a lot of cycling because it's got a lot of this material in the trunk of a tree, for example, that's not going anywhere for a long period of time. Succession is characterized by a change in the structure, which we saw the past slide here. This structure, a field, shrubby, small trees, tall trees. Later on, I hope you don't hear the frappe machine in the background grinding up ice. Later on, as forests become old growth without disturbance, their structural change as well. There'll be more gaps and holes in the canopy. We'll talk about that as we go on. Although one end of that spectrum showed a climax ecosystem, the climax doesn't mean it's the end. Ecosystem change never stops. There's always change going on in a system. And all ecosystems undergo change and development, and it's location specific. What happens at your place, wherever you are, in Colorado, New Zealand, or South America, Africa, your site is going to be different than any other site around you. It's going to be most similar to your next door neighbors and sites close by that have similar soils and location within the topography. But for all practical purposes, it's very location specific. And there's different stages, obviously. There's the low growth and the early stage, taller shrub phase, small trees, tall trees. The wildlife changes as well. There's a succession in the types of animals. And if you look at this one right here, this is about habitat for woodcock, which is a ground nesting bird that usually hangs out in savannas, edges, young forests. There's not a lot of habitat for woodcock, other than that they'll hang out in the field and eat, and they'll sing, and they'll flirt with one another, and they feed in shrubby, brushy land, and then they'll nest in kind of early young forests, and they barely hang out in tall, mature forests. And so as the system develops, the types of animals that will be in a system will change. You may have more grass grazing animals in a system that has a lot of grass on the left. You may have a lot more things like owls and squirrels and fungi in a forest like that on the right. Just want to show different pictures that it's different everywhere. I chose this one not because of the glorious graphics that come out very pixelated, but this is very similar to the site where I'm at right now in Southern Virginia. The species that are involved in this are exactly the species that are around here. And the process that this is going through is the successional it's the successional pathway that's unique to this particular region. I got my tang tangled up. And different texts will describe different forest types differently. I don't necessarily care what you call things, as long as what you're describing is accurate and accurately describes the changes that take place in the system. There's two types of succession, two main categories of succession. One is primary succession, and that's ecosystem change that occurs on previously unvegetated terrain. If you've got these glaciers that melt, all of this exposed rock has not had vegetation on it. Maybe it did a zillion years ago, but for all practical purposes, there's no vegetation on the rocks, there's no vegetation on the debris as the glacier melts. There's no vegetation on the outwash, the alluvium that comes from the streams running out of that. Primary succession is the development of an ecosystem on those unvegetated surfaces. This is one of the photographs I took earlier this summer at Isle Royal National Park in Lake Superior. I'm a real fan. I'm fascinated with primary succession, and I'll spend a lot more time, way too much time, on primary succession later. But what we see are all different phases of it. And a rock, obviously, is not a very thick, highly developed ecosystem. These plants, these lichen and plants and fungi have managed to get a toehold, and they're starting to change the site conditions. They're changing the site conditions from bare, inhospitable rock, super hot in the sun, super cold in the wintertime, and they're starting to accumulate soil. They're holding more moisture. When the water freezes, rocks crack and break into smaller pieces. They're exuding acids that are dissolving the rock. They're incorporating those minerals into their bodies, and they're taking carbon dioxide out of the air and turning it into cellulose and lignin that then dies. You see the stuff dying right here and decomposing and creating the soil. It's the process of primary succession that starts building soil. And succession includes the development of soil through time. Now, secondary succession is community change following a disturbance. What I wanted to point out in here, a couple of fascinating things. If you've been paying attention to previous webinars, you guys are aware that I spoke about the wave regenerated fir. It's a very specific type of topography with prevailing winds in a particular region where it's cool enough to be growing fir. What I want you to notice here is, see all the snapped off trees. This is all wind damage from the trees. And you notice these undulating patterns of grasses in between. This is a site that's wave regenerated fir. This is the latest wave of trees that broke. Notice the root plate that fell over. We now have a mixing of the soil. Any rocks or subsoil that was underneath is mixed with all of the roots of the trees. It's tipped up on end. There's now a pit on the backside, and a mound develops here as this decomposes. So we have a series of pits and mounds, and look how they're in such regular patterns. These are in wave patterns. These rows where previously trees had blown over. I just find that fascinating that even nature itself follows some very specific patterns when making new sites. It actually does disturb the soil. It actually does make pits and mounds, swales and berms. It actually does things in a fairly regular patterned manner. And it also does mix trees with grasses. So what we see here, although it may look ugly to the untrained eye, to me right here, this is ecological magic happening here, because we have timber growth, we're growing trees, we have the benefits of trees, and we have the benefits of grasses, and we have the benefits of shrubs, and we have the benefits of the pit and mound architecture for, accumulating moisture, organic matter, and so on and so on. This is a incredible ecological model that we can imitate with our agriculture. Other types of disturbances. That one showed wind, fire. Fire and wind, the biggest two disturbances, most common disturbances historically on planet Earth. Secondary succession follows the disturbances. This is logging down on the lower right. This is obviously an ecological disturbance. There will be ecological succession on this site after disturbance. This shows disease or pest outbreak. And one of the things I wanted to point out, the farm gang of the place where I'm working at is supposed to be watching this webinar. And I just want you guys to look at this pattern here, of this linear pattern laid out on this particular hillside. This isn't exactly how the farm that we're working on will look, but it's got a similar layout, and that we're going to be having alleys and then rows of trees, and alleys and rows of trees. I wanted to show down on the lower left this map of Wisconsin, flood events. Flood will drown trees, it can bury, and grasses and all that. It can scour riverbanks, it can make new lakes and ponds, it can cover things with mud and silt, it can cause mudslides. I live right here at the upper left corner of Richland County. Between 1982 and 2012, there were 81 major flood events in Vernon County. 32, it's like, that's the #1 county in the whole state of Wisconsin for massive flood damage. And I think Richland Center was like number 13 for number of flood events. And what's coincidental about that is this is the hilly region. This is very hilly, so there's lots of steep slopes, and it's also the most heavily agricultured. This is where the heaviest, all through here, is corn and beans. Up here it's more potatoes and timber, and it's all timber across the north. But look where most of the flood damage is occurring. It's in the agricultural areas, and especially in the hilly agricultural areas. And why do people continue to build towns and cities in floodplains? It's beyond me. Agriculture is a disturbance. That's why I brought that up. It's in modern times, the past 50, 60 years, it's the most widespread type of disturbance on the planet. Almost 40% of the whole entire planet is devoted to annual agriculture. That's the largest ecological disturbance on the face of the earth right now. This right here, New Forest Farm, my place in southwest Wisconsin. This represents the opportunities of disturbance. There's a new type of person. You're one of them if you're paying attention to this. We look at ecological disturbance and we see opportunity. We see opportunities to create new niches within the system by imitating natural systems and natural processes. I think I'm going to go show this slide again in the future, a few slides forward, but I want you to pay attention to this section of vegetation, this section, this one, and this one, because they're really significant when it comes to succession and change through time. This is an early successional oak savanna shrublands. Now, biological legacies that survive disturbances, and our disturbances can be fire, flood, windstorm, animal impact, human impact, asteroid, zombie apocalypse. They are a key feature directing the course of succession. The things that are left behind are the ones that can populate a newly disturbed site. Also, things from the outside can come in. We'll talk about that also later. Too many times, actually it was just recently I saw a post by someone who had spent quite a bit of time at my farm bemoaning the fact, oh my goodness, you know, Gaia is dying. She's breathing her last. We've got to stop killing her. No, sorry. This is the ginkgo tree in Hiroshima, Japan. It was basically less than a half a mile from ground zero, and it was burned to a crisp in a nuclear explosion, and it survived. It's doing just fine. And I don't think this planet is going to revert back to cockroaches and germs when the zombies come. I have a feeling there's going to be a lot more legacies left behind. I think I'm going in the right direction. This also shows legacies. What we had here, right there, showed a couple weeks ago, this one big gigantic maple tree. This maple tree has been casting seed. When its seeds are ripe in the early summer, we get a lot of these warm southerly winds that blow the seed this way. Now, this is all planted to chestnut, but this is chestnut and a whole lot of maples from what we call our grandmother maple. This is a neighbor's property of mostly box elder and black walnut. By the time the black walnuts are ripe, the winds are blowing from this way, and the box elders are ripe, the seeds are ripe all the way through late summer, all the way through the winter time. And so there's a lot of the box elders. See how these are bigger ones here and then smaller ones there? They migrated that way. They've migrated this way. This was black cherry, and I think most of the black cherry was animal dispersed in here. And then through this system here and this system here was mostly white ash. The white ash, once again, those strong southern winds blowing the seed forward across this particular site. Those biological legacies are what drove a lot of the succession, are still driving a lot of the succession on my site. This is pictures of after a volcanic eruption. I believe it's on Surtsey off of Iceland. The same thing happened on Mount St. Helens. There was, this massive explosion. Obviously, the ecosystem was disturbed, and ecologists thought it would be years and years and years before life came back. But there were these biological legacies. Somehow, a little plant, a little patch of grass, a little patch of flowers, somebody, maybe a rodent was able to find shelter in a tunnel underneath this rock. These little biological refugia now became the legacies that seeded and repopulated the site. So whatever species are around your site, near your site, or exist on your site after disturbance, they'll drive succession. Obviously, these redwoods are going to be dropping lots of seed. You see some of them here and here and here. All these over here. These are sometimes referred to as a biotic inertia. So no matter what site you occupy, look around. What are the trees surrounding your site? They're going to be throwing seed in, especially if they're light-seeded, fire-adapted species like we have right here in Virginia. There's a lot of loblolly pine and yellow pine that will be flickering seeds all across the site. Now, the successional pathway is the pattern of the vegetation change over time. It can be an increase in species, a decrease in species. There's no one particular pathway. And your site where you live right now has a successional pathway, and it will unfold through time. Whether you're aware of it or not, your site is changing and will change. You might as well learn to observe it, understand it, and interact with that change. Now, the successional mechanisms are the interactions of the processes that contribute to that change. We are contributors to that change. We want to consciously interact with our site, and we strive to optimize system health and function. System health and function, yes, but we also want to optimize human values, because after all, we need to eat. Now, notice I didn't say maximize. We're not looking to extract a maximum yield of any one particular thing. We're not interested in extracting anything. We're interested in interacting and actually being a beneficial contributor to the health of our site. Then the successional model is like is a map explaining the pathway by explaining the relationships among the mechanisms in the various stages along that. And tonight's webinar is in part a private session for the guys on the farm, because I want to show them that the very site that we're working on right now has all of the instructions in it that can teach you how to interact with it. The same is true for no matter who you are. This one happens to be where they live and work, so the pictures will be meaningful, more meaningful for them. The place around you has all of the instructions right there telling you how to move forward, unless, of course, you're in a place that's so denuded and depauperate that there are no legacies around. But even if there are no legacies around, all we need to do is understand how succession works. And then we strive to provide for human needs while imitating natural processes. We can know the abundance of the future, and we can actually help create that abundance. Because if we don't, it's going to be more of the same status quo. How can we just extract another resource? How can we deplete another ecosystem, deplete another fishery? The history of forestry in the USA is not a history of natural forest succession. It's a history of extraction succession. As Europeans came to North America, they extracted the resource that they wanted the most in the Northeast and all across the pine regions. It was white pine. So clear cut as much of the white pine as fast as you possibly can, and make ship masts and planks and all that kind of stuff, and then build houses. And then after that, the next wave of plants that was left behind, the legacies left behind, they took over, and then the forestry industry learned how to adapt to the next resource base. And then that was overexploited, and then they had to adapt to the next resource base. That's kind of a twisted type of succession. We can actually have a more conscious succession that allows us to produce higher quality timber, food, fuel, medicines, fibers, etc., and have healthier ecosystems and have a more sustainable ecosystem, because the whole extraction industry, it's a dead-end game. We can't continue to deplete everything. We have to get into an ecological steady state at some point in time, and that's why I'm doing these webinars and encouraging you guys to do so. Two basic different kinds of succession. We already alluded to it a little bit. Autogenic succession of a site is one that's characterized by change from within. There's enough species in this particular system, in this particular place, that they regenerate themselves following certain patterns, of course, that are dependent on certain disturbances. Allogenic succession includes factors originating from outside of that particular system. So a classic example of an autogenic system, this is one of my favorite places in the world. This is Algonquin National Park in Ontario, Canada. It's a very large, almost wilderness area. And there's enough species going on here that is site adapted that if something happens, if it's a fire, a windstorm, a pest outbreak, disease outbreak, and it leaves a hole or a gap or knocks down wide swaths of trees, there's enough species around here, there's all the species right here that it needs to start all over again and continue the process of site development. Down on the rocks here, we see a little bit of the allogenic succession going on, because this rock doesn't have all of the seeds necessary for it to survive, so it needs to be supplied from the outside. The classic example of a allogenic successional pathway is tree planting. This is Karen Vanek, the nursery manager at Forest Agriculture Enterprises. If you guys want to buy edible trees and shrubs, go to forestag.com, contact Karen. This is Scott and Margaret. They were summer folks at New Forest Farm this summer raising cattle. They've now moved to a property in Colorado. Pay attention to them. You'll be hearing from them in the future. And this is Lisa Geary, whose property this is right here in southwest Wisconsin. And I believe that most of these trees planted right here are roses and raspberries and hazelnut and serviceberries. Several different species of roses, like thousands and thousands of them, primarily for flower essences. She's a professional herbal medicinalist, whatever you call that person. So an allogenic succession set up by an outside force, a human being. This is a classic example of an allogenic from outside. Some crazy guy showed up 20 plus years ago with his wife and young son, and they proceeded to plant trees, and more trees and more trees and more trees. This is also a mix of both auto and allogenic, because we've already talked about these particular trees spreading from where they were. So we were bringing in species from the outside, driving that. We were also bringing information and intelligence and our own personal will and our actions to this. All kinds of other people coming along and participating as well. We also brought livestock to this particular property, where it was cropping, purely row cropping before, like this, corn and beans. And then it also was regenerating from the inside, autogenic. How is succession known about? Why would you even think about it? Well, long time ago, in the I think it was 1830s, if I have my time right, the first person actually to use the term succession was this guy, and this really blew my mind. I was prepping for this webinar here when I found out the first person to actually describe succession in its full completion, well, full completion as it was known at the time, was this guy called Henry David Thoreau. And he wrote several different papers on plant succession and forest succession in the Northeast. In Germany, they began to study single sites and just to observe what happens on that site over time, starting in the late 1800s, and the first studies in the USA were in 1908. So since 1908, and still going on, the same plots. The same exact spot on the same piece of planet, watched through a period of time, so 108 years or so. That's a long time to watch a site. But how we do it is we look at comparable sites, similar soil, similar species composition, similar rainfall, similar temperature regime, and plants and plant communities and animal communities will behave similarly on similar sites. So we need to become astute observers. And everywhere you go, look at the plants on the side of the road, look at the trees, shrubs, bushes, and vines, and try to understand how is that changing through time. If it's the same species that you see 10 miles down the road from you, same species as on your place, are they older, are they younger? Has the site had more time to develop, less time to develop? Has it just been recently disturbed? And become an astute student of succession. Now, how does it work? If it was as simple as a computer, it would be easy to understand. Computer is based on a very simple code that, for all practical purposes, it's a signal and it's not a signal. So it's on and off, ones and zeros. It's a binary system. And just using very simple binary combinations, you can have a computer that works like this, telephones that talk around the world, and we have how many different continents can participate in a single live webinar, simply with ones and zeros, or ons and offs. Whereas ecological succession is massively more complex than that. So you can imagine, the potential different opportunities we have and different combinations that we have. It's more like trying to mold fluid with your hands, like a really soft clay. It's not an easy digitized process. It's an artistic expression. All the different diversity of sites on the planet are the framework where it takes place. There's all kinds of disturbances. We already talked about zombie apocalypse and cars and fires. Then the organisms themselves have a huge range of life history traits. Genetic adaptations. We've already talked about different disturbance adaptations, from fire adaptations and wind adaptations. Then one of the things that I find most fascinating is this right here, is the changes in the site conditions and the organisms, with one affecting the other and vice versa. If you have a garden, you disturb the soil and plant carrots. you've created a change with the disturbance of the soil. Now, whenever you do that in a different year, it's going to be somewhat different. But you also notice similarities. When I till the soil at this time of year, when it's this temperature, I get these results with my carrots. Well, then you grow your carrots. The carrots change the system. Then after your carrots, what do you do after the carrots? Do you mulch it? Do you pull it? Do you leave it blank during the course of the year? The organisms living on a site change the site. The changed site then can support different organisms. Those different organisms change the site, and so on and so on and so on. There's these reciprocal changes back and forth. And then one of the things here is competition and mutual interactions among organisms. Contrary to what many people are saying these days, not everything cooperates with one another. The whole universe isn't one grand cooperative scheme. There's a number of different ways of interacting. There is cooperation, mutualism between organisms. There is actual competition between organisms. There's symbiosis. There's parasitism. There's many different ways that organisms interact with one another. They're not all cooperative with one another. They're not all mutualistic with one another. And so, of course, if you take, the 50,000 different things that can happen here and here and here and here and here, toss them all together, you have an amazing array of different possibilities that can happen. So what we need to do is not come up with a simple answer in our minds like, oh, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. It's not that simple. It's very complex. It's not complicated, but it's complex. It's more complex than anything I've ever studied in my life is nature, natural systems, and ecological succession. All right, so interrelated causes of succession. This is where we're going to spend the rest of the evening tonight, looking at this right here. All of these things affect succession. The climate in your region. Here we are in southern Virginia. The whole region experiences a certain kind of climate. Well, within that region, the local climate, the way the river's bent here, the hill is over there, a swamp over here, the ocean over there, it affects the local climate, affects the conditions on our site. The physiography, the shape of the land itself, including the plants on it, the vegetation patterns, the landform, are you in mountains or valleys, soils, and then the species distribution. Let's take like middle of Illinois, for example. If it's been corn for 200 years and nothing else but corn, there's hardly any species distributed across that area that are going to naturally colonize. Succession is going to be radically slower there than it is here in southern Virginia, where we're surrounded by both industrial and private forest land and a lot of wild land, a lot of wild species, for all practical purposes, unmanaged. Radically different successional pathway and speed of succession. Of course, site availability. This is pretty significant. A lot of people don't really realize that, but disturbance is almost essential. It is for plants to get established. There needs to be some sort of disturbance for growing sites to become available for plants. What kind is it? Is it a fire? Is it a windstorm? Is it blown down tree, pit and mound architecture? How frequently do disturbances happen? Do you have hurricanes every single year, or do you have hurricanes once every 45 years? How big are those hurricanes, or windstorms, or tornadoes, or fires? How severe are they? How do propagules disperse? And then what's the whole history of this particular site and systems around it? Now, on the landform itself, on the property itself, where is that property in relation to seed from somewhere? This particular place right here, like I said, is surrounded by mostly industrial forest. There's much of it has been replanted. It's been logged over at least twice. Back in the Civil War, this was all growing. It was all agricultural, so much more open. And the forest has returned. It's been at least 2 different timber harvests since the Civil War, quite possibly more. So its position now is radically different. This site where we're at is surrounded by all kinds of seed, whereas in 1870 there may not have been a lot of seed around, so its successional pathway would have been slightly different, and it would have been slower. It would have taken longer to develop than it does now. Right now, in this part of Virginia, if there are trees that are cut down, there's more trees right there to replace them, and they take over fast. How do our species reproduce? Is it seed? Is it by roots? Is it by falling over and making rooted cuttings? How vigorous do they grow on that particular site? Dispersal agents. Are you a fruit like a honey locust that gets eaten by some sort of elephant or giraffe and then pooped out later on, and as it grows in a little pile of manure? Or are you like burdock and you hook to a coyote's fur to get transported halfway across the country? And then each different species, and this is one where we have a lot of effect on right here, are these genetic adaptations of our plants. We can select for species that are more site adapted simply by planting more of them. And if we give them minimal care, and if they die, they obviously are not suited for our site. The reverse, or the flip side of that, is if you go ahead and you plant specific plants and you demand a certain performance out of them, and if they don't perform the way you want them to, you then add fertilizer, fungicide, herbicide, pesticide, cultivation, staking, et cetera, you're now on the inputs side of things, and you may have genetically inferior plants. They may produce bigger fruit, bigger nuts, whatever it is, or more nuts, but they don't perform on your site because they don't like your site. Your site is not the one that's suited for them. We can use the natural traits and the plasticity of the gene pool to develop more site-adapted, minimal input plants really fast. And then understanding all the different competitive effects, mutualistic effects, and then of course stressors that are involved, and some things that we're not going to talk too much about because it really is kind of minor in the grand scheme of things, as a liliopathy. Black walnut being a prime example, the one that seems to get the black eye all the time, being super liliopathic. There are species that exude chemicals that suppress others, and walnut's one of them. It doesn't suppress everything, just certain plants. We're going to deal with this mostly next time. This is the stages of primary succession. I'm going to go right into secondary succession and talk right about the site. But in either case, we have primary succession that happens on dry rocks, dry soil. We have primary succession that occurs on moist rock or soil. And we have aquatic succession as well. And what's really fascinating, one of my favorite courses in college was, I forgot what the name of the course was, but it started with ponds or muskegs or lakes or whatever, and over time these ponds fill in and eventually grow through all these different stages until it's a forest, a full canopy forest adapted to your site. And I thought that was really fascinating. Secondary succession is system development after disturbance. Now we're going to go right to our site. How does all of this stuff with succession, how does this affect us, and how do we interact with our site in order to be in harmony with natural processes, which is part of the point of restoration agriculture. We want to closely mimic as best we can natural processes and interact with it. Instead of fighting against nature, we want to join with nature and go in the same direction or similar direction, more like a kayak, zipping through all the waves and turbulence, instead of a speedboat with all the energy forcing its way through and smashing into a rock. So the stages that we're going to talk about tonight, I use these terms right here. It doesn't matter if you use these terms, they're fine. This is more old school. We're not going to address this at all. But stand initiation, stem exclusion, understory reinitiation, old growths. Tonight we're probably only going to be able to cover this much right here. Disturbance. This all secondary succession follows disturbance. This is a clear cut. This is a clear cut in southern pine in Virginia. This is not the exact site that we're working at, but this is very similar to it. Now, a little word about clear cutting. If you think back to a couple of different sessions that we've had, think about massive wind throw, and think about forest fires. What we have in that case right there, we have a particular type of disturbance that's massive. You can think about the volcanic eruption that we had at the beginning of the earlier up in this webinar tonight. When you have a massive disturbance like that, there are species that are adapted to it. The lighter seeded species, pines and so on, and birch and aspen, cottonwood, they're actually designed, ecologically designed, to have massive catastrophic disturbance and to recover from that. The wind throw up in the Boundary Waters this summer, where Jen and I went and we took a whole bunch of photos, gave a webinar on it. It was about 10,000 acres. Essentially a clear cut. Everything was just knocked down to the ground, poof. Well, there was a lot of organic matter left behind, all the stems, the trunks, and the roots. This, on the other hand, this is a clear cut, and all that wood has been removed. All of the biomass, the carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, the lignin, and cellulose has been removed. Most of the nutrients, though, have not. What's interesting is the nutrients are mostly in the cambium layers and in the foliage, in the needles and leaves. The carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen has been removed, and the plant actually took that from the air. So this is actually very similar to a large forest fire, for example, when all of that carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen is re-released back to the air. The difference between this and a forest fire, of course, is that this organic matter is going to decompose more slowly than after a fire. The nutrients are almost immediately available. The ash will make a much more alkaline pH and change the site condition that way. Both sites will experience a lot hotter, a lot drier, a lot harsher conditions for the regeneration of many species. But this is not inconsistent. Clear cutting is not inconsistent with the natural patterns and the regeneration habits of certain species. What I think needs to be learned is what are the sound, sane limits to clear cutting so that we can actually have a quicker site development, quicker succession, quicker colonization again of the site. How can we not have so many clear cuts in a row that we have no more habitat for wildlife or humans that might require a more developed ecology than this? If you're interested in early successional habitat development, free money from the government. Code 67 describes early successional development, and I'm not going to go through this. You guys can read through this. We have a government program to encourage landowners to keep property in early successional habitat. Well, we can do that. You can take taxpayer money, go on welfare, get payments for this, or what you can do is now grow timber again on that site, but instead of just taking the money to have the government, have you manage your property, why not produce, beef, milk, chicken, eggs, alpaca, sheep, wool? It's revenue positive. It may not make a fortune, but it's revenue positive, short-term and long-term, because of course you still have trees on site, because you're going to manage this post-disturbance in such a way that we follow the successional pathway. Now, here we are near Halifax, Virginia. This area up to the tree line was clear cut, it seems to me, about 10 years ago. It was replanted with pine, mostly longleaf pine and yellow pine, probably 4 years ago at the earliest. You see all these pines through here. This is the stand initiation phase. After a disturbance, clear cut, for example, back here, seeds come in from the outside, or seeds were there on the site. Seeds, pieces of roots, stumps. This is advanced regeneration. There's enough propagules in many places around the world that you don't have to plant a thing. It's there for you. The Sahel, south of the Sahara in Africa, there's a I think it's millions and millions of hectares of land has been reforested through what they call FMNR, Farmer Managed Natural Regeneration. Instead of keeping these things clipped all the time, like out in this pasture, see how it's mowed real close? Instead of keeping everything clipped all the time, recognize that this is a tree. It only looks like a little stub or a bush at the most, but if you let it grow, it's actually a tree. Let's have the advanced regeneration become our next forest. This site here was clear cut, like I said, probably 10 years ago. Yes, it was planted to pines, but the majority of the trees here was all advanced regeneration. It's tulip poplar, sweet gum, red maple, lots of oak. There was actually a fair amount of oak that was logged out here. Monstrous stumps. A lot of the oak is regenerating quite well. So advanced regeneration are the propagules that were already in place. Seed in the ground, a stump left over, or an understory plant that was surviving in the shade, that all of a sudden, now this disturbance is here, it all responds, vegetation grows. What I like about this picture here is this shows us all different sorts of things. And if we're talking about succession, to many of you, this just may look like just a mess of vegetation. But we have sweet gum in there, we have tulip poplar in there, we have a couple different species of pine, we have grass in here, we have all different phases of ecological succession are represented here. This is telling us what our options and what our opportunities are. We can start to select these components in the system that we want to favor. All of these are natural. All of these are native to the site. All of them will thrive and do well right here. What future do we want to create? How do we want to interact with this site? Well, once all of this crazy stuff starts to grow like crazy, you get to this phase called stem exclusion. It's the thinning stage. We're trying to walk around and lay out lines to put in water collection terraces and make some ponds. And this is one of the thickest young stands of regeneration that I've ever walked through. And believe it or not, there are two people less than 25 feet away from me in this picture right here. There's Crazy Jack and Alyssa. And what we're doing is we're going just a few trees ahead of each other. I would run with a compass and a GPS, mark the next, stand by one tree. They would come up behind me and mark next trees, and Jack would remove some branches. See this little pink right there? That's Jack. And he's 6'5", I think it is, with a pink ribbon, and right behind him is Alyssa. So this place, not only does it need thinning, it is thinning. These trees are just dying. The ones that have been shaded out or out-competed for moisture and nutrients, they die, they fall over. Well, we can imitate that stem exclusion, that thinning. We can interact with the site in such a way that we actually thin the forest at the same time. And I just noticed this leaf down here, and it almost looked like chestnut, but I know it's not chestnut. I haven't seen any chestnut, and that's not chestnut. What we see here, there's a lot of the vines that got established in early years before it all closed in and became really, really tight. A lot of greenbrier and honeysuckle vine and Virginia creeper. We are, after all, in Virginia in this particular site. Notice how thick the stems are. Trees will begin to die. They just will. And so what we can do is we can look in here and try to figure out which ones are going to die next. How can I remove those and have some sort of income from that while I'm doing the removal? And a classic for woody material is, of course, mushrooms. These guys, if they manage the site right, they're going to have literally thousands and thousands of mushroom logs available every single year ad infinitum, forever and ever and ever, as one of the yields from the system. Thick as can be. And also, since we know what we know about fire from a few weeks ago, this is an amazing fire hazard. All it takes is one Bubba Joe driving down the highway throwing out a cigarette butt that rolls just right. And this place is going to be a crown fire to beat the band. It's nothing but ladder fuels from the dry, crispy sticks on the ground just right up to the top, torch it right out. But that's okay. They're all fire-adapted species. It's going to come back just as if it was a clear cut. I just wanted to show you how thick these stems are. If I'm from like my chest to my fingers 3 feet, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Just that little view right there is just amazingly impenetrable. Naturally, trees will begin to thin themselves out at this stage. So let's us do it. We got teepee poles. We've got fence poles for rail fences, all kinds of uses for this material. So how do we insert ourselves into the stem exclusion stage? This little spot right here, this was the first object lesson I showed Jack and Ethan a little bit about what we are looking for. When we look at this right here, I want you to pay attention to all the different stuff that's on the ground and know what they are. All the little trees, all the medium trees, all the big trees, and then look at the form of the trees. We've got one here that's got big, widespread branches that are overshadowing everything. That's taken up a lot of space. In the space of this one tree, we could put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 if they were straight and tall. And so we can select for straight and tall growing trees. We can select for values that we want, and at this site they're going for feed and animal feed and human food. So we're leaving behind oaks, we're leaving behind hickories, we're leaving behind pecan, we're leaving behind persimmon, mulberries, and in the right place, if there's none of those species in place, if there's a pine there that's growing straight and tall, or a sweet gum or a tulip poplar, we'll leave that behind. Whatever has a really nice form, is growing healthy and vigorous, is really dominating the site and showing that it's very adapted to it, we'll leave it behind. Well, how do we insert ourselves? Ta-da! This is Ethan. Please, before you start using one of these things, take a chainsaw safety course, use a helmet, use face shield, hearing protectors, and safety chaps. It only takes one accident to really, really mess things up. Now, those of you who have a small enough acreage, you don't want to use a chainsaw, that's fine, use a handsaw. But if you're going to be doing any kind of acreage interacting with the system, and if you're going to plant trees, you'll want to have the ability to cut lots of trees because one of the wonderful things about being a forest ag, restoration ag person is after a certain period of time, we've planted so many trees that we almost can't keep up with them, cutting them all down. So use a sharp saw. And this is the same exact site. Notice the pink tags on the trees? Go back here. This is this site. Boom. And now we've got more sunlight to each of these trees. They're going to grow faster. These are going to grow taller. The understory is going to recover again. And so maybe 3, 4, 5 years from now, we'll go in and do another thinning because these are starting to compete with one another. Maybe we'll take out this tulip poplar for poles. Maybe we'll wait till it's about 6-inch diameter and take it out for oyster mushrooms. So now what we're looking at is we're looking at the species in here, the form, how they're growing, and how do we want to interact with them through time so that we can actually have some sort of food and human value. Learn to identify the plants at your feet. They're the next successional advanced regeneration. This is your future. What's interesting is you may have several different successional pathways represented in the same picture. This has a lot of high-bush blueberries and low-bush blueberries, and it's in with pine. Well, if we want, we can select for the blueberry direction. It also has some oak in there, and of course I can't find it right now. I must have covered it up with this. And there's some maple, some red maple. We can go to a maple forest, we can go to an oak forest, we can go to a pine forest. All of them are valid successional pathways. Which ones do we want to set up? If we want to grow commercial blueberries, we might want to look at inserting blueberries into areas that have pine. Here's some little oak seedlings. It was underneath one of the blueberries there. These oaks, we have to understand how the plants behave. Oaks require full sun. They will not survive in deep shade. They'll last for a few years, but then they'll eventually peter out and die. So if we want to have oaks, we want to get in here and remove this other material. Here's just some more examples of these understory plants. These understory plants are your next successional pathway. First of all, if we start removing crooked trees and maybe diseased trees, this little twisty curly one that had a vine wrapped around it, and select our straight
So I think we lost Mark for a moment. If anybody's out there, yep, I see a few comments. Looks like nobody else is hearing Mark. Mark, if you can hear us, we cannot hear you. Almost got through the end of the hour. I will try reaching out to him. See what we got here. Looks like I see a frozen screen too. Yeah, you guys are seeing frozen screens. Well, in the meantime, while we're trying to get Mark back, I see we have a couple of questions. Looks like we have a question from Jordan. Yes, the recorded sessions are available. You can find all of those online at c.mykajabi.com. Mark, would you mind sending that out in a chat to everybody? If you have any other questions that I can answer, can't answer any of Mark's, but it looks like we might have lost him, unfortunately. I'm hearing a little background noise now. Nope, nothing that time. Any other organizers? Are you hearing Mark? Did you hear anything from him? Oh, we also have 2 Marks on the staff right now. We have Thank you, Karen.
This is Mark from Bangladesh. I'll put the link in the chat box in a second. Can we reach him by phone or anything?
Well, we might be able to, but we only have a couple more minutes. I'm not even sure he knows that he fell off.
Okay, cool.
So thinning can be integrated with tree for goats. So, everybody, thank you for asking your questions for Mark. Unfortunately, we have lost him and he can't answer them. I see. I just saw some screen move. Hello?
Do I gotcha? Yeah.
Mark's back.
What happened?
Hey, Mark. We couldn't hear
Let me
you.
get back to my. How did that happen? All right, hang on a second. I got a presentation. It went away. It totally disappeared. Come on. All these right here, all these webinars, man, you have access to these by becoming an EAT member. And remember to be an EAT member as soon as possible because we're going to be charging monthly in the next 2 weeks, I think, is when I'm going to do it. And I hopefully scrolling this fast won't make it crash. But these are really, here we go, we're getting there. These are really cool slides that I've got coming up because this is like the guts of how this kind of mess is what we're making sense of and patterning and going to optimize. Okay, back to here. Water management pattern, dozer, this is what it's going to look like. All right, this is the thing that we're using, and this is the site where we're going to start. This is where there's going to be a pond that's going to start to accumulate water in here, and then it'll start to spread it out to the ridges and water other ponds. Now we use that forestry mulcher to grind down, we're thinning out this thicket. Then we made 2 passes with the mulcher, and then we leave a group of trees. So the spacing between them is chosen based on the equipment for one, and based on observation of trees in the forest next door to us. And so this right here will be the row of trees. Now what they do is after we remove all this, what you can see, look at this, there's grass. This is going to be grassy. In the full sun, the grass is going to respond. We'll have to come through here maybe once a year and have this trimmed with the mower. And then in here, we'll go through and we'll select for the trees that we want. It may be pine, it may be hickory, maybe oak. We may have no trees in there that we really want, and so then we'll plant some that we want. I know Jim, landowner, wants blueberries. We're going to have lots of blueberries. So this is where Marcus, the operator of the mulcher, went through and cleared off the area that will be the pond. The pond berm wall will be here. This will be the main pocket of the pond right here. This is a swale coming in to feed the pond, and this will be the outlet that exits the water and spreads it to the rest of the system. But look how we've set up this pattern already, and imagine in your mind the aerial photo of New Forest Farm. So if there's 2 mower passes or mulcher passes, that's 12 feet, and then another 6 feet, and 12 feet, 6 feet. So there's 12 feet of grass, 6 feet of trees, 12 feet of grass, 6 feet of trees, 12, 6. These are all even patterns that follow the same pattern as the water management system. So now all these trees, they're going to grow even faster because they have more light and they have more water and nutrients. And then the grass obviously is going to respond. Look at all the grass here. It's going to grow, and so now we can graze cattle in here, or sheep. Be careful with the sheep because they like to browse. We can definitely start raising pigs in here. Let's make sure that the pigs have rings in their noses. Now we can actually produce food and an income from the site while helping the trees to grow faster. This is actually I hope the audio works on this. This is Marcus, the equipment operator, and this is hysterical. Can you?
Sorry, Mark, I don't think we can hear it.
Okay, all right, then I'll stop. Anyways, what happened, if you can't hear that, what happened is the Hydro-X stopped working and the arms weren't down all the way, so Marcus got trapped inside. And it was sunny, 90 degrees outside, so it was about 300 degrees inside. And instead of trying to figure out how to get out, after a while he began to just like claw and scratch at the window until his fingers were bloody stumps, and we laughed at him and teased him, and eventually he got out, but it wasn't pretty. And then this is going to be the same thing. You won't be able to hear it. I wonder how I can do that. This is my last slide for tonight, but I wanted to get to, see if it'll move. It won't. It'll go here. Okay. Well, let's watch this though, because so you can see what we're doing is this is 1 machine width worth of trees that will make 2 passes with the mulcher. This is the row of trees. I'm trying to narrate as we go. There's blackberries. There's blueberries. Let's keep going. So what we're trying to do is make sense out of a mess, put it into a certain order that's based on optimizing the water distribution. I'm going to shut off the sound so I don't have to hear it. And it may look rough now, but we know that grass grows. This grass is all going to come in really nice next year. We can top seed it with additional seed. We can put in legumes if we want, clovers and alfalfa. And now we'll have these wide rows for animals to graze in, or wide alleys, and then the trees in here. And in 5-10 years, as the trees start to crowd one another out again, we now harvest these for mushrooms, for saw logs, for firewood, which really isn't that big of a market down here because it's so warm. And long term, we can have a big, tall, open canopy forest with grass underneath. So we can cash flow this every step of the way. So if somebody is working on a PhD thesis right now, we would like you to come to this site and research this, because what we are showing here is we can grow the same quality, if not a better quality, pine timber and oak timber on this particular site, and it'll be a lower cost through the years. It'll be faster growing wood, so we have a quicker turnaround for when you get timber, and you'll actually be able to cash flow through the years with, persimmons and mulberries and chestnuts. When we plant chestnuts, pecans are already on site. They've got honeybees on site living in hollow trees. So how can we convert a clear cut to a productive silvopasture system. There's a PhD thesis for somebody out there. And I do believe that's what I have for tonight. Any questions? I'm sure there's a few.
Awesome, Mark. Great presentation. I'm glad we got you back there at the end. Let's go through some of the questions we have here. If anybody has any other questions, shoot them in real quick. We'll try to get Mike to get to them. It looks like we have one from Jen. It says, it looks as though the thinning could be integrated with tree hay for goats and other small ruminants.
Ruben absolutely could. One of the things with, there's on 130 acres, you can use all of your thinnings and prunings for animal feed, especially winter feed. You can either store it or just, cut and feed directly right away. The situation here is that the landowners from a different state just recently, like 2 weeks ago, bought a house in the area, so hasn't even been able to live here yet. And this is like the first stages of site development. So to get the water management system in place, the hydro acts as part of his equipment. At this point in time, there's not even perimeter fences, so livestock is not part of the equation yet. As soon as livestock are there, are they going to be eating tree hay? You better believe it. There's going to be all kinds of resprouts going on, and the only things that I know that really don't seem to eat a lot of resprouts from young twigs are pigs. But cattle love them, sheep love them, goats like them too much. And actually, in this situation, you could probably get away with goats simply because there's so many acres worth of young sprouts. There's no way the goats could ever keep up with all of it. And that's another issue with using tree hay as part of the system. It's like, how many animals would it take to manage the sprouts on 130 acres? Probably a couple thousand. Well, then now you're a goat manager first and foremost, and you better be on your game, or they're going to destroy the rest of your resource base. So whatever we introduce to the system, absolutely it can work. How can we do that? How can you utilize the tree hay for livestock in a way that doesn't cost you more time, money, effort, or equipment than you actually get from having the animals integrated in the system that way? Whereas with grass and cows, it's pretty easy. You move electric fence once a day, you get better grass growth. They pretty much stick to the grass and the more palatable trees, and you can fence off your more valuable trees. They don't jump 45 feet like goats do. They don't stand up on their back legs like sheep do. And there's a lot of people that eat beef, and there's a ready market for beef, even if you just take them to the sale barn down the road. So an easy first step. It really is one of the simplest first steps for some sort of regenerative agriculture is cattle used as a tool to improve the resource base, not just stuck out there so they graze it to death. And that's saying a lot coming from me because I'm a once upon a time, I am a forest ecologist, but I'm a once upon a time earth defender and vegetarian, and animals are the problem. They're the ones that are grazing the planet to smithereens. We've got to stop eating animals and start eating corn instead. I've changed a lot to realize how incredible a tool livestock can be in a system like that. So yes, you can feed tree hay. Go for it. Figure out how, and then report back, and we'll do an interview with you on your tree hay site. I want to see that.
Awesome. We got a couple questions from Sam as well. His most recent one says, I know you are not really a livestock guy, but do you have a cattle breed preference for these systems?
What do you mean I'm not a livestock guy? Give me a break. Livestock are an essential part of my system, and they're really important. Any place that you go to, this actually also ties into the last question. No matter who you are, you have certain preferences that you really focus on. I'm the tree and shrub guy. I really like the trees and shrubs. Everything else has to support my core interest, which is the trees and shrubs. Other people are, like Greg Judy, for example. He's a cattleman, first and foremost. It's all about the cattle. He'll do anything and everything we possibly can to also support the cattle. So whatever system we set up is going to be somewhat custom designed for your site. Now back to the preferences. Do I have any preferences? My preference in livestock breeds actually start with cheap. And so if you can get cheap animals, that's what I prefer. I was just contacted a couple of weeks ago by a guy who wanted to sell me some coonies, however you pronounce them, because they're super incredible, you know, it's trendy, blah, 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 blah. I was like, well, you know, how much do you want for them? I want $5,000 for each animal, $5,000 for a sow, $5,000 for an uncut boar. I was like, sorry, pal, I'm trying to sell like food to people, and if I get a pig that's like almost a dwarf, they're small pigs, that's not a lot of food. If you're going to be paying X dollars per pound, you want to have, you know, as many pounds as you can get. I want to feed people, not have trendy little hobbies. So cheap is one of my prerequisites. And then another thing, something that you can dump, I'm going to put the word dump in quotes, you can dump on the conventional market and be okay with. If you all of a sudden had too many coonies, and you couldn't get rid of them, if you go dump a $5,000 animal on the sale barn, you get $135 for it, you're not going to be very happy. Whereas if you started with cheap pigs or cheap cows, even if you do dairy steers, is what I've done in Wisconsin, it's a very ready available resource. In the spring, you go get little bull calves because they're in the business of milking cows, and if the price of calves is really low, it's not even worth their effort to take them to the sale barn to sell their bull calves. So, you know, they're almost giving them away. You pick them up for like, you know, $25, $30 sometimes. So you raise a Holstein steer, for example. You're like, oh, but that's not a prime beef breed. It's like, well, so what? I got it for $25. I put 600 or 700 pounds on it just by letting it wander through my rows of trees eating grass and eating twigs and sticks. And at 600 pounds, I sell it for $2 a pound. That's a heck of a turnaround. So cheap really mattered for that. What I I've learned the hard way about why human beings have bred the brains out of most of our domestic livestock. We've had Scots Highlanders before, and I think that they're almost too smart because they don't always want to do what you want them to do, and they just outsmart you, and they jump fences and run around the neighborhood, get other people's cows pregnant, break your arm with their horns. So it's also a smaller framed animal. Once again, you don't get as much meat per animal. In a ideal world, I'd go with I'd go to Greg Judy and get some animals from him. He's been on grass, or Gerald Fry. Those guys are all breeding. Is it the Devons, the grass-fed beef Devons, and they're making some great, raising some amazing animals. Actually, you know who's done some amazing work just in a few short generations is Peter Allen at Mastodon Valley Farms. I forgot the name of his. I think it's Thunder. Is like a 2-year-old bull. It's like his 3rd generation animal. It's just the most amazing looking animal. Full-size frame, and it eats nothing but grass, period. So whatever you can get cheap, and then whatever does really well on grass. And what Greg Judy's method of breeding is very similar to mine with trees, is stun, sheer total utter neglect. If an animal starts to look funny or doesn't really start to thrive, immediately goes to the sale barn. That's it. It's gone. He does not want that in the gene pool. You don't want an animal you have to take care of. If it needs any kind of attention or babying, get rid of it before it gets too deteriorated. So I think I successfully avoided answering your question. Particular breed, cheap and big.
Awesome.
They're all tasty.
Yeah, time for one more
said I'm not a
question.
livestock guy. I'm gonna slap him. I sure do.
Perfect. We got another one from Ethan asking, would you recommend using controlled fire as a tool to thin mature forest areas or clear waterways?
Well, once again, if you've been paying attention these past few weeks or so, I don't necessarily recommend anything. What I want to do is I say, look, here is a technique. This is what it does. Here is another technique. This is what it does. What we need to do is instead of having a recipe that says do this, don't do that, do this here, don't do that there. Instead of following that old way of interacting with the world, we're going to sit down and we're going to say, all right, what are the different options that I have at my disposal here? What does controlled fire do? How would it benefit the system for me? However I see, that benefit in the system. After all, it's me who's running the system. What are its upsides? What are its downsides? What are its costs? What are its benefit? All these different things. What about that hydro axe? Why would I use that ridiculous thing? Well, because of what it does. That's what it does. It sets up the next regeneration. We could go in and manage with fire afterwards. One of the things that I've been contemplating for years is getting one of those little mulchers that you saw in the video quickly, and then getting a dragon flame weeder, like you've seen in some of my blueberry photographs, and go through and coppice a row of hazelnut, because they need to be regenerated every once in a while. So go ahead and coppice that row of hazelnut, and then follow up by doing the flame weeder behind it. So you torch the dry stuff, and you immediately snuff it with the box behind it. So that would easily imitate the effects of fire going through the system fast. I'd love to try that on my hazelnuts. So would I recommend? It's like trying not to recommend. I'm trying to say, understand what does that tool do? Is there another way to accomplish those effects in a different manner? How can you accomplish the effects that you want to affect? This and it's similar, like with the goat and the twig hay. How do you harvest the hay? How do you deliver it to the animal? Do you let the animal browse it? Well, then, do you let the animals browse every single tree or only the ones that you want them to? And so how do you manage that system so you can actually get those animals fed that particular product? Well, do you get a different machine that now harvests the twigs and delivers it to the animal? How much is that machine going to cost? How much land do you have to have in order to harvest enough to make it worthwhile to feed the animals to pay for the machine? So everything that we do is going to have a whole set of cascading events attached to it. And if we're going to do this for real, we should think about what it is that we're going to do. And I'll go right back to that mulcher, the forestry mulcher. This area in Virginia has a lot of forest, just like we see in the picture here. There's a lot of people who would like to have some timber stand improvement done that would be willing to pay a service to come and do it for them. So this is now a business opportunity to bring more revenues to the whole farm ecology. There's also they're going to couple that with a edible landscaping nursery. So they'll have like a land clearing service, edible landscaping service. Now the edible landscaping service, they'll be able to use that mulching thing. They just take off the mulcher attachment and put on a front end loader. And now they've got a bobcat for doing landscaping in people's yards. Well, since they have the landscaping business, they need to buy plant material at wholesale. So they're going to buy edible plants wholesale, plant them in clients' homes in the suburbs, and then put the remainder out on their farm. And so in that context, that makes sense. Instead of having goats with no perimeter fence and no way to get them the specific browse you want to get them, or using fire and not necessarily having a context for the fire. So just understand the tool, understand how to use it, what its effects are, and how can you accomplish your objectives in a manner that doesn't break your bank and hopefully feeds you well. And I think with that, I'm going to call it a night. I've been on a bulldozer like 24 out of the 36 hours, and I'm kind of like rattled.
Oh gosh, you need to get started. Well, thank you everybody for joining us and sticking around. Almost everybody stayed the extra 20 minutes. We really appreciate it. We're sorry we can't get to all your questions. Perhaps we can get them in next time. Have a good week, everybody. Thanks again. Thank you, Mark. Thank you to our staff, Deb and Mark from Bangladesh. We will see you all next week.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.